you. Welcome to the November meeting of Southampton Village Planning Commission. Number of topics tonight. Want to start out, we had a community meeting 2 weeks ago in the Hillcrest neighborhood. I thought it was a very good meeting, very, very well attended. Studio AB Architects presented the study that we had talked about at the last public meeting of the Planning Commission. So there were, and I'd like to hear from other people who were at the meeting what they thought. I think there were sort of two items that we proposed that I thought had general consensus in the meeting. One was to allow in that area a minimum of a 10-foot side setback, which would avoid having a number of those houses both be non-conforming and unable to basically build. If they were affected by the larger setback, which is currently 15 feet. And then secondly, and really in combination with that, then have the same GFA apply in that neighborhood as applies in the rest of the village. So those two in combination seem to have general support, I would say. We talked about a number of other items, including and probably the most significant item that we talked about that I think needs sort of more thought and study was to potentially not allow combination of lots in that neighborhood to keep the current affordable nature of that area. There is a, as the Studio AB study found, there's a tremendous difference between the sale prices and affordability in that neighborhood versus really the entire remainder of the village at this point. And it's probably the last affordable neighborhood left within the village borders. I think there were mixed thoughts about that, and one of the things I want to talk about tonight is undertaking a survey to get a broader sense of what people in that neighborhood think. So I think a few people, Laura, you were at the meeting, I think.
Joe was there?
Joe was there, Mark was there, Jesse was there. I think that's it. Anything you want to add about the meeting, or?
Well, also the shifting the zoning boundary for the...
Oh, right, correct, sorry. Yes.
To include the lots that are in the OD district that face Hillcrest.
Right.
Anyway, that was pretty much agreed upon as well.
Right.
As well as the 10-foot.
Right. Right. So I should explain for the audience. So the other thing we talked about is it turns out that some, and I'm not sure quite why, but some of the house lots in Hillcrest actually are zoned with the office district on North Sea Road. Doesn't seem to make any sense. I don't think we want to see office development, but not that there is much, but spreading onto the residential side streets. I think it's an accident of history. So the other thing that we proposed that seemed to also, I think, get broad support was to change that to the R75 that's in the rest of Hillcrest.
I felt that was good. It was a mixed bag of reviews from people. I think,
Right.
Overall,
Right.
there is support to do something, whether
Right.
or not it's this or not
Right.
something else. I think it's we hold them to
Right.
be able to say. So.
Right.
The question, I guess, is the Planning Commission prepared in view of the support from this draft of this study to ask or propose
Right.
the changes to the village trustees?
Right, right.
Are we there yet or are we not there yet?
Right. Right.
I would like to add that there is a house up there that's on the market for over $1 million, so
Yes,
it's
I
kind of
noticed
already creeping up there, if you will.
Right,
So that's
right.
something to be aware of.
Yep. Mark, Jesse, any
Yeah,
other?
I thought it was a very positive meeting. I think that we reached out to that community. I think it has a lot of historical value in that neighborhood to keep a certain fabric. I thought the proposal of the 10-foot side yard was very good, but the same thing to keep the same GFA as the rest of the village was also the right thing to do, to have a level field. Not to allow combination of lots, I think, I'm not so sure that, I understand that it will definitely achieve what we're looking to achieve, but I'm not so sure in terms of protecting property rights, whether this is the right thing to do.
Right.
But I think we should be close to making a recommendation.
Jesse, any?
The only thing that I would add is that the recommendation should be as seamless and easy to follow as possible.
right.
And not become too cumbersome. So basically the key points that we discussed, putting
Right.
those in, but not making it, overly restrictive.
Right.
As Mark mentioned, combination of lots,
Right.
just to be fair and consistent.
Yeah.
I just want to add also that there was a discussion about the wastewater disposal in that
Right,
area.
right.
And to study to possibly combine the wastewater disposal with either the adjacent facility, the adjacent retirement facility,
Right.
which I thought was a great idea.
Yeah, that was a
Or
good
possible
idea. You're right.
to also create a mini system for that area.
Mm-hmm.
It would also be a very good idea, because there's a lot of restrictions, the lots being that small, there's a lot of restriction with the septic systems, with the way to place the septic system, and then it would maybe impede to install a pool, because there's a distance between the pool and the septic system. So I think it made a lot of sense.
I wasn't there, but
Yeah.
if I can just add,
Right.
with the proposal that you mentioned, I think they're all good proposals, with the exception of combining the lots. But I think we should not lose sight that although this area is affordable right now, this area also represents people's investment.
Right.
And to
Right.
start making changes that will limit the
Right.
value of the properties,
Right.
I would be against. I don't think that would be proper to do.
Right,
So,
right.
people should be able to, like the rest of the
Right.
economy, we say we want to maintain affordability, but
Right.
the other token, people that own a house,
Right.
they see the value go up,
Right.
they may want to cash in and
Right.
retire someplace. So I don't think we should put limits on that.
Right. Okay.
I'd like
Yeah.
to say, if they do start combining the lots, then the rules and regulations change completely. They got to comply with the rest of the village.
Yeah,
Right. Right.
Yes.
Right.
And as I said in the last meeting,
Right.
it's just a matter of time before they realize that this area is there.
Yeah. I mean,
If
as
they combine lots, though, wouldn't they have to go through a permitting process to make that like one lot, or, do you know what I mean?
yes, but I think one of the reasons for us to act, if we decide to act, is
Oh, yeah.
that
No.
currently we have this odd circumstance where you could combine lots and build a bigger house on those streets today than you could build anywhere else in the village, which I'm afraid may encourage
why is that?
speculation, because right now, because that was left out of the
Oh, yeah, I mean,
the
they have to-
proposal.
yeah, I
Right,
mean,
right.
that's why-
Right, I think that's why we
proposal-
need to fix it, because
And-
otherwise there'll be
And
speculation.
maybe if you combine lot that has a width that's more than,
Right,
then the minimum 15
Right,
applies.
right.
Yes,
Something like that.
I mean, that's what I was
But
getting.
otherwise, yes, I mean,
Right,
everything else
right.
you're proposing, it seems fair.
I
Any,
don't know what the language would be for that, so,
right,
but,
They have something called single and separate,
right, right.
that if the zoning lots were not modified in the last, from a certain date, then you can grandfather, or you can have special zoning. So we could have something similar, that if the zoning lots are not modified, then that's one zoning. If you modify the zoning lots, then it's another.
Any comments from the audience about Hillcrest? Okay, so I'd like to propose, and I'll do it one by one, so we can discuss each. First, that we change the office district zoning in Hillcrest Terrace, which is a very few, the number of lots, to the R75 that's in the rest of the neighborhood.
Yeah, makes sense.
Any discussion?
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
in favor?
Makes sense.
Okay, great. Okay, second then would be, and I'll say it right this time, I apologize, amend the minimum side setback for non-conforming lots 60 feet or less in width to 10 feet. which would basically solve the issue that the smaller lots have. Particularly, I think, as we all know, because many of these houses were built as ranch houses, and they're very wide, they literally would not be able to expand their house without tearing a piece of it down, which clearly is not anything any of us want to see. So,
I would just add that provided that the zoning boundaries or the lot boundaries have not been modified.
right, okay.
Yeah, I think that's important.
Right.
It probably doesn't really
in the
matter.
60 feet or less.
Right.
Yeah, it probably doesn't really matter.
It's inherent in that
Because
language.
first of all, you're
isn't
saying
it?
the 60 feet or less, but
Right.
apart from that, with the 410 rule, once the width gets bigger, the
It's not
side...
60 feet or less.
No, I understand, but if it's larger than 60, once
Right.
the width gets larger
Right,
with the
right,
410 rule,
right.
automatically you're going
Right.
to go over the 10 feet.
Right.
So you really don't need to say. That's why last meeting I said we might as well apply this to the whole village, because in the
Right,
end, it
right.
works out the same.
Right.
It doesn't matter.
No, but you might combine the lot with another lot behind it. Doesn't
So
necessarily-
what if we did the following? What if we said
wider.
that this is generally something that we all would like to see happen, and we would ask the village attorney to
Yeah.
draft this in a way that makes clear that this is just for existing lots?
Exactly.
Okay.
That's the language I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think it's important that there's
Right.
guidance if there's a lot merger.
Correct.
Or when
Right,
that occurs.
Right.
But only if it gets wider, because he just
Right.
mentioned if it gets deeper, who cares? It's
Right,
still not
right.
wide enough.
And some of them actually would be better if they got deeper.
Right.
They're very lots. So is there all in favor?
Yeah.
Okay. And what I'm hearing, certainly from members of the commission, I feel the same way, is that I think the proposal on combining lots needs more study. And I would say at the meeting, there was mixed feelings about it. There was not, I think the other issues, there was reasonably consensus in the room. There was definitely not consensus on that issue.
Yeah, as they say,
Right.
yeah.
Right? I mean, there is a lot of concern about
I would
finding a balance.
table it.
Okay.
Me too.
All right, so anything else on Hillcrest?
Maybe that
Yeah.
we would study the possibility to use the retirement facility.
Right, yes,
That's
yes.
probably,
I think
that's
that
probably
goes
down the
hand in
line.
hand.
Right,
I think that goes hand in hand with any sewer or sewage
Right.
discussion.
Yeah,
But I think
In the whole
Mark's
village?
right. We said we would follow up, so we should, Mark, you
Oh,
and
we
I should
did?
follow up.
Follow up.
I
But
thought
to do
they were
stuff
going to
like
follow
that,
up.
No, I
I
think we
thought the
should follow up.
residents were going to follow up.
If you do stuff like that, who's going to bear the expense?
One question, where you can put the plant.
No, the idea is, apparently there is a plan at the,
At the retirement.
at the retirement
Rehab.
facility.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
rehab.
At the rehab center. So the idea is, could you basically hook into that facility, which is reasonably new?
One of the questions that when I was in the Architect Review Board, we were very concerned how close they were to the well fields up on Prospect Street and the distance they were located with the treatment plant and the injection fields.
Right,
And that was kind of an interesting topic.
Really?
right.
Huh. What year?
It's back in the night, let's see.
I mean, that could,
Probably.
we could
Wasn't that
study
long
that.
ago?
Probably resolve itself by now.
Jesus, at least probably 10 years ago.
Yeah, I
Well,
would
we
say
could
10, 12
study
years
that,
ago. Right.
That was a discussion?
That was one of the discussions, where the well field is located on Prospect Street and where the location of the sewage treatment plant is.
So Mark, is this an issue you could look into further? Because it definitely, you're right, it came up in the meeting, and people were talking about the fact they felt that when the rehabilitation center had been built, there was talk about amenities and other benefits for the neighborhood that they felt had not happened, so this would be a definite.
Wanted to take that a step further.
Right.
They not just, there wasn't just talk, they said we were promised that.
Right,
And
right.
and many people at that meeting said, yes,
Right.
yes, we were. So,
Yeah.
not to mention,
Right,
that would
right,
just be a
right.
net
Who's
positive
gonna bear the
for the
cost?
environment anyway.
Well, I guess the idea is, and a little bit like the thought about the hospital, but there's other issues with the hospital plant, but the thought is there is an existing plant that's already been paid for, and if you hook it in, could you pay just a usage fee or something? Because Mark is right, the issue is going to be, if someone wants to add onto their house and they're dealing with the Department of Health, they're going to have a very hard time, because it's very hard to upgrade on their existing lots. Their lots are so constrained. So,
That's interesting.
yeah. Okay, and I would say just one final comment, which is, and because we're going to talk about the hospital in a minute, one of the things that I came away from that meeting was really the benefits of reaching out to a neighborhood to get their concerns and actually moving the meeting to them. to the neighborhood, I thought had a lot of benefits. I mean, it really got a large turnout at 2 separate public meetings. And I think we got a lot more input than we would have got otherwise.
So should we take this show on the road?
I think at times we should. That was a good example. It was really, sometimes also when you're in a less formal setting, I think
Yeah.
people feel more
I
able
understand.
to interact, so,
But I think we should take the show, on the
yeah.
to be fair.
Right, so maybe on that note, we talked
Go to this Disney World.
to a winter meeting.
So, yeah, winter meeting.
We've been talking for several months. One of the things that the new mayor had asked when he came into office is that we begin to think about what would happen if the hospital were to move. And since then, as I think everyone in the room knows, the state legislature voted to approve the move. Eldon Scott was very instrumental in moving us to meet with the hospital and get their thoughts. I think we had a very good meeting with them. The mayor had a good meeting with the president of the hospital. And I think there's been general agreement that we should move together with them to start to think about what should happen after the hospital moves to the Southampton College Stony Brook campus. The first step was to go out and seek firms to work with us on the public process and do some research work for us. Those RFP responses were due last week, and we got 5 responses from AECOM, BHC Architects, Environmental Design and Research, James Lima Planning and Development with FX Collaborative, and BFJ Planning. 3 of those firms are from New York. One is from Huntington, and the last one is from upstate New York. So it was a good response. I think the next step, we're going to get copies made. There's not enough copies here for everybody, so we'll make sure plenty of copies are made. The next step would be to read through these, bring people in for interviews. I think we had talked with the mayor and the trustees about setting up a working committee that would also include people who live in the neighborhood around the hospital, other interested members of the community. Certainly the hospital foundation itself.
Yeah.
And then I would also suggest probably people from the town, because the town is going to sit on both sides of this. This is, by the way, just interestingly enough, I think, and importantly, as we begin to look at this, this is by far the largest employer on the east end of Long Island. So where they move and what they do is important to everybody here, not only in the village, but in the town. The town will be, they will be moving from the village into the town when they move to the college campus, and so part of how that all gets handled. But it is I think, extraordinary once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the village to do it right, and make sure that whatever happens to replace it is a net benefit for the village. I mean, the other concern I have, honestly, I think we all have, is when you take 1,100 employees and move them from Meeting House Lane to the college, that's going to have real impact on the year-round merchants in the village. These people all go to lunch, or they go to dinner, or they get a drink, or they go shopping when they have a few minutes. And so I think one of the things we really need to think about is how we manage what's going to make a distinct difference in village life. Those of us who live around the hospital may be very happy that we don't have ambulances in the middle of the night, but there are other things that the hospital does that I think are meaningful. So, Eldon, do you want to talk about this and sort of how we're going to go through the next steps?
No, I think it's great. We had a great response in terms of firms putting submittals in. So I think we'll be interested to review them. I think it's a good idea to get a working group going.
Right,
So,
right.
work with you and anyone else on
Right,
that,
right.
on the commission.
Right.
kind of
Eldon,
thing.
can I ask you just for the public to also to explain what these RFQs are supposed to do? That is, what is it we're asking for them to do for us?
We just asked for a proposal to look at the entire site, and I believe the adjacent site as well.
Yeah.
And just to consider what the land use and zoning might be in, after discussion with the hospital and all the other interested parties.
And
Because right now, the zoning is for, it's a special zone, which
Right.
wouldn't even be appropriate for
Right.
once the hospital's gone. So the zoning is not appropriate right now for potential future use.
And I think like we did with the Village Center to run a process for us. I think one of the things that was really good about that process was we had an expert helping to lead, to bring everyone through the process. And I think the idea would be hopefully this will work in the same way, where an expert can facilitate the process really is about facts. And I think the idea is hopefully they'll come up with some options that everyone can begin to think about. There are ideas out there that range, I think, all the way from single-family homes to condominiums to senior living of some type to co-working space. There's a million ideas out there, and I think trying to sort of manage them and decide what makes sense for the
that's a
village.
pretty tall order.
Yep.
Can we follow the principle that we did with Span with the village to not really define the use,
Right.
but instead define what it'll
Correct.
look like?
To some extent, yes,
And
because
make it a lot
right.
easier than trying to
Right.
define this is going to be zone condo.
Yeah,
this is
yeah,
gonna
no,
be
I
zone
agree.
Single.
Right,
So give it more of a development.
Uniformity?
right.
More of a uniformity?
Not
Uniformity?
necessarily uniformity, but to define the development, but not necessarily the use. Would Stan be interested in stuff like this?
I mean, I think that's what, that's what
Right,
the whole
right.
process is for.
Right.
And, the firms, we'll review the firms and make sure they're qualified to look
Stan
at
be
that.
interested in something like this?
No, but the BFJ Planning is part of the same larger firm that
Oh,
Stan's
that's
part of.
interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Paul, what I'm concerned about is the parish hall that's on that property.
Right, correct.
That lists all our First World War residents who were killed in the war.
Really?
What's going to happen to that building? I don't want to hear them, they're asking for a demolition permit. I don't think that property should be excluded from any development in that area, and it should be preserved.
I think
Is it listed as
historic resources was one of the things we asked them to look at. That's not the only one. There were definitely structures that the hospital controls that are potentially have some historic interest.
Is Parish Hall listed as historic?
I don't think it's a separate landmark, but it's something that would certainly be discussed as part of the resources.
Yeah, I don't think anything on that site is currently.
Well, it's even
listed
like the
anyway.
first hospital,
Right,
which is
correct.
across the street in the
Right.
corner. There's photographs of the nurses and patients sitting on the front
Right.
porch.
Right.
We should recommend this so that it becomes a historic
Yeah,
part of the village
yeah.
before it's too late.
One thing
Yeah.
also that I've heard from people, they want some green space along with this. They want
Right.
maybe some of the parking lots to be put back in some green space. They want maybe
Right.
to possibly preserve the two lots that are on the Capaglia, I believe the
Right,
hospital owns.
right.
So if we can coordinate that with
Yeah.
this, that'd be great too.
Yeah.
But I think it will be a process like the one that Stan led. So we'll talk about open
Right.
space, historic uses, use, whether that's addressed.
Multi-use, right? Multi-use.
Environmental issues,
Right.
and probably we'll have to get a little bit into, all of the resources and information that's needed to make a proper decision. So I think it's just the beginning of that process.
The question, before they put the sewer treatment plant in, they used to have cesspools.
They're there somewhere.
There's definitely some potential environmental issues.
Yeah.
They might have a problem there.
Right.
Yeah.
An abatement, huh?
Yeah. Comments, questions from the
We're
audience?
not going to make this a PPD or a PDD. We're not going to make it.
I don't, well, I mean, we'll have to see what they say, but I don't think that's been the direction people have been talking about. I think it's just creating a zoning that makes sense.
Okay.
And then,
But
you
if
know,
you did
there-
a multi-use, doesn't that sort of dictate what zone is what?
yeah.
Does anybody have any idea how many condos they could put into that building? And are they going to avoid any affordable?
I think those are all the issues that are going to
Those
be
are all
studied.
things that are going to
Yeah, yeah.
be presented.
I mean, I don't know, and that's obviously one option. Clearly, you know, as we've talked about it, you know, on this commission for a while, everything we do, affordable or workforce housing is something we need to look at. But again, we've left it open for these firms because I think one of the things we learned from working with Stan is, you know, bringing in outside people. Well, part of it is you look at it with a fresh view, and that's I think part of the value that bringing in outside firms brings. So we tried not to define it and say, you tell us, looking at this, you know, what thoughts come to mind in terms of what should happen here, and also what have other towns done? This is not the old this whole trend is really nationwide, both because of the change in billing in healthcare that we all know. I think each of us personally knows all too well, and then the change in technology in healthcare. Most existing hospitals are dinosaurs in one way or another. And so this whole issue of what happens with existing hospital buildings, you know, towns have dealt with across the country, and hopefully we'll learn a lot from that.
We're lucky to have one even on Montauk Highway.
Yeah, no, I think from a healthcare point of view, ultimately, it will be good news because it'll be much more modern healthcare.
More accessible, too.
And more accessible, actually.
that's-
So, I mean, I think it's good, you know, again, it's good news. It's just we have to manage what that means for the village. And particularly, again, I think on the commission, one of the things we've stressed is the importance of the year-round nature of the village. And this really goes to the heart of that.
I only have one question, County Road 39.
Right?
How are they going to make a left-hand turn to get to college?
I don't know. And that's one of the reasons that I think we should really be doing this with the town, invite the town to participate. I mean, village and town have sort of acted very separately from each other.
Does the town own that road, or does the county own
It's
it?
a county road.
It's a county road, but once you get to dealing with taking property that's not on the road, I think you're dealing with the town.
But
The campus is definitely in the town, not in the
Are we-
village.
The town regulates it, too.
Yeah.
we're not doing anything about the, we're not
We're not
involved in the
involved with
new construction of the hospital.
No.
No. I'm only concerned about ambulances coming from the east heading west. How did it make that turn to get to the hospital?
Well, let me just say one thing. The only way we might be involved is, that one thing that might happen is whether the hospital decides that any of the activities happening on the campus should stay, which is one
Yeah,
possibility.
okay, right.
I think they even discussed some
Yeah,
uses
yeah.
interesting.
Right.
Really?
All those buildings, all the medical offices.
What's the office use?
Some are part of the hospital, some are
That's-
privately owned.
You know, we have to dig into it to find out.
And that's part of the area we asked them to study. Yes. Could you stand up and say?
To come to the front, Regina, for Charlie. Follow that. You have to go in the front, okay. I have to introduce myself?
Yes.
For the public.
Regina Grieven, 375 Ox Pasture Road. Has anybody here spoken to Walter Dean?
Yes.
Because he has reached out
Yes.
to the hospital. He has formed a committee,
Right.
and they haven't been very, let's say, forthcoming, to put it nicely. There's sort of this and that, you know, and he's tried several times, so maybe you might have more of a,
Actually, Walter Dean
Contact.
came to us, made a presentation
yes, right.
previous meeting.
Have you been in touch with him lately? Does he have anything new to say? No. Because they were supposed to get back to him, the hospital people. I wondered if they did. I don't know.
I don't know if the hospital spoke with Walter, but that's, you know, this is now the village's effort to
Yes.
bring all the parties together,
Well,
so we'll
Good,
have to,
okay.
When
and
the,
others.
well,
Good, I'm
Eldon,
glad
when
you're
the
in touch.
mayor
Thank
met
you.
with the hospital people, was Mr. Dean present? Was he there? Were they included?
I don't know, but I think so. After Walter Dean came and made the presentation to the commission, we spoke with the mayor and the trustees, and I think the general sense was Walter had an excellent point, which is we need to get involved now. I think the sense was let's broaden this to include everyone who's interested in the village, not just those who live right around the hospital, clearly have an important voice here, but also others who you know,
Well, I
going
was
to be
just
impacted
wondering
by
with the
this.
meeting with the mayor, if Mr. Dean was also at that.
I don't know.
I think all the discussions have been about getting this process going.
Right.
So this is the beginning of that process.
And Walter clearly is going to be part of the process. Actually, a member of Walter's group contacted the mayor and myself and asked to be the person representing that group in this working group.
Oh, okay.
So,
Cool.
yes,
I'll give you one other issue. You guys may...
name first, please.
Yeah, well,
Right.
Alan McFarland, 26 Tuckahoe Lane. I've been asked and have started to work on legal opinion about, for a group that want, my job is to find the money. Okay, the usual stuff in the village. The windmill. There is a project that's underway with the college that do not own the windmill, apparently. That is, the hospital says they don't own it. The governor owns it. So the issue is who owns the windmill and can it be bought to put back on Windmill Lane? Where the plan you guys did X years ago,
Right,
it went in for the business
right,
district,
correct.
has it down on the triangle, past the bank, which is,
Yeah.
the plan says,
Right.
the bigger plan says banks are bad. Well, some things are bad in a village if you're going to sustain the business district. So the bank, Astoria, whoever owns it now, is there. Next to is an open space. The plan shows there's going to be a road, possibly as a diagonal. If you remember all the stuff that went through secret, everything for the village planning that the trustees have adopted. But the trustees are interested in getting the windmill back, if you can find the money. It will have to move on Hill Street, used to be Shinnecock Road, now called Hill Street, not on Route 39. If you do the wire count and all the things that it takes to move something of that size down, that project involves also trying to get the utilities to participate, because the retail price for moving a building gets very high.
Right.
It was deemed not to be eligible for the village to be part of the negotiation with Cablevision, their new owners. So it wasn't part of redoing the franchise to get them to help, because there are only a few wires that carry electricity across Hill Street, as opposed to telephone, cable. And so the project's underway. So whether that affects your planning for what, I think it does, at least historically. I give you notice that it's underway. I'm supposed to find the money. The windmill is endowed. If you go and look at the plaque, even has Henry Kissinger on it, a whole bunch of guys, I don't know, 15 years, oh yeah, he's alive and well, but his opinions. But a whole lot of people gave some money, and the windmill internally was set up to be a guest house. It's apparently inside, it's fabulous. I haven't been inside, I've looked in the windows, but it's in great shape historically. To finally move back, it was given there, to move back to the village. So that, I raise that for your plan.
Well, the mate to it's in Georgica.
Where is the
The mate to
triangle?
it's in Georgica. There's were two windmills on Windmill Lane.
Yeah, that's right.
It was moved to Montauk first, and then when the Second World War came along, and they're doing the Fort Camp Hero, it was bought and then moved to Georgica.
Exactly. So this is more interesting to get.
Yes.
I think a good idea for the village.
Yeah, it's up on the hill.
Where is the triangle?
Nugent Street, Windmill Lane.
Yeah, yeah, Stan's plans show the window at that location.
For us locals,
That
where
would be great.
Spice's gas station used to be.
Other comments, questions? Okay, so we'll be moving forward with this. I think the next step's probably going to be a series of interviews, and I think, we've been talking about maybe physically changing how we run the next meeting, and if we can do this either at the next meeting or soon after that, creating a way for that
Be
group
a
of people to get more
special,
involved.
special meeting with just
Right,
us.
yeah.
And we're going to invite.
Right, so sort of begin to get the other people involved. So, and I think copies of this went to the hospital at the same time, hopefully. So,
And that group.
right, correct. Okay, so, sorry.
Could we get some additional copies?
Yeah, I'm going to get copies made. There's, for some reason, there were 4 here. There's 8 of us, so.
You don't have those in PDF.
They are, I believe every group did send them in PDF, so I'm going to try to get.
Distribute the PDF.
Yeah. We'll try to get the PDFs around to everybody. Yeah.
Gosh, I can't print a PDF.
Well, but I'll also just get Xerox copies made. We've been told, the last few meetings, we've begun to look again at an issue we had thought about a few years ago, and I think for various reasons is an issue that we're looking at again and hopefully can begin to make some things happen. So the condition of both Lake Agawam and the other freshwater lakes in the village has been a matter of great concern, I think, for everyone who lives here or works here. There have been some notable private efforts to begin to address some of the issues in the lake. There was the Lake Agawam Improvement Association, which was founded, I think, about 6 or 7 years ago. They've made some efforts. There have been some other efforts. And the village itself has actually very quietly, I would say, maybe much too quietly, undertaken a number of efforts over the last several years to try to begin to address the issues that plague all our lakes, and in fact, all the lakes of the East End. These are issues both historic. I don't want to make everyone think it's just current. These are some of the issues are about years and years, in fact, decades of runoff from the farms on the East End. And the geography of the East End is water runs from north to south, and therefore right into all these freshwater ponds, whether it's Georgica Pond or the ponds in Watermill or whatever. They all are grappling with many similar issues. And so we decided to, and we had looked at a sewer system about two years ago to address some of the issues that come from the village business the district and impact on the lake. There have been studies done about Lake Agawam and what's causing it. So we talked at a meeting, I think a few meetings ago, about beginning to undertake this again and look in a more holistic fashion about all the things that are impacting Lake Agawam and how we could address them, and in part taking advantage of the enormous amount of work that's gone on in the last few years from a lot of different sources. The other thing is, I think at the last meeting there was talk about the fact that there's now some public funding that's beginning to be available, and whether we could be more aggressive about beginning to get those. And last and not least, as Mr. Schifrin has pointed out at several meetings, the county health department has finally opened up and is willing to be more innovative about wastewater systems that could be used. So I'd like to turn the floor over to Jesse Warren to talk about a little bit about some of the things we've been doing. I should also mention, I don't think he's here tonight, but Nick Palumbo of Suffolk County Community College has been helping us, which has been enormously helpful. So Jesse, do you want to start to talk a little bit about what we've been working on?
Sure. So there's a lot going on, especially recently regarding obviously water cleanup. Obviously, we want to leverage off our discussion from the last commission meeting where we had a good first step as far as how to clean up Lake Agawam and other freshwater lakes in the village of Southampton. We, as Paul said, there's a lot of good resources that are available to us. Obviously, we all have copies of this study, which was done in 2009, but actually lays out the framework for what needs to get done, and much of this is still very relevant today. So what I would love for the commission to essentially assist on, and hopefully we can take the lead, is basically addressing these points that have been kind of very succinctly laid out for us here, and start basically addressing them both one at a time, but also as far as an overall plan. In addition to that, there is a lot of money that is now available to us, through grants. There is CPF money, as we know, that's available for water improvements. I attended a meeting last week, was lucky enough to attend with Mayor Irving, where we met with some of the officials from Suffolk County, including Peter Scully, who's kind of in charge of sewage and water improvements. And apparently New York State has now allocated $10 million towards Suffolk County. And that is money that we should encourage our residents here to go use. And so there's many steps. That's one step in the right direction. I'd love to kind of get some ideas as to how we can help facilitate the access to those rebates and those grants because they're there. They want to give that money out, and we want to make sure that as many Southampton Village residents and homeowners that want to install an innovative alternative septic system can get it. Back to this plan from 2009, they obviously have discussed, a runoff in the watershed area. I was very pleased to see the village get a grant from the town, and I think Gary Gillespie from the Highway Department did a really good job on that. But we also should be working even more closely with him to try to potentially come up with even a bigger scale plan to address runoff. Why stop in one specific area? Why not, attack the entire watershed area? Obviously, you brought up septic and sewage. That's an enormous area to discuss. We could attack one at a time, but we also can discuss other areas. And then there's a lot of new technology out there. In some discussions that I had with the town, kind of people are discussing something called a permeable reactive barrier, which is new technology for a buffer system, so we can prevent runoff once it gets down to the lake. And then obviously working with the private sector and working with citizens of Southampton to also attack this issue. So just getting the word out and letting people know. As you mentioned, the Lake Agawam Conservation Association has done a good job as well. We want to get them more involved and work with them as much as possible. So there's a lot, there's many places to start. I think the goal is as good of a time as ever to start addressing this. We might want to discuss where should we start? Should we start everywhere? Should we go back to a comprehensive plan? What's the best strategy? I mean, I think obviously the best strategy is just start getting to work one thing at a time. So I don't know if you want to jump in, Paul, as to where to go from here. I did invite, I mean, I hope it's helpful, but I did invite Assemblyperson Thiel to the next meeting. So I hope he can join us and he has some ideas, and there's other funding sources, and I guess we should just get everybody involved as we can. I'll leave it to you to discuss where to go from here, but I'd love to get everyone involved as much as possible.
Question two, first of all, on the state funding, that's for sewage upgrade for individual properties? That's okay.
There is money from the state, there's money from the county, and then there's money from CPF. So there's three sources. There's two different ways to get it. One is from the state/county, and then one is from the town. Two different application processes.
Right.
And again, I'm thinking that it'd be great to have somebody help with that. I don't know who that right person is, but I think if we can assist. Apparently they gave some numbers at the beginning of this meeting, and they showed how many people start to apply, how many people actually finish, and those numbers kind of dwindle down. So it shows that it's a bit difficult to get, so we want to make it as easy as possible for our residents to go get that money.
Has anybody reached out to the town trustees? Because they own those bodies of water.
We have.
Okay.
She's going to get upset with me, but I invited Ann Welfare in the back to come, but we should reach out to more of the trustees. But that's another discussion. Because we want to obviously, reach out to everybody.
And one other suggestion, which is I know in the back of that initial study, there's a checklist.
Yes.
So I think it would be really interesting, because we have that as the basic data.
Right.
But if we just took the checklist out and we kind of sort of update it, because I know a few of those things have actually been done, so it'd be great for everyone to know exactly what, and the highway department did some work. And then maybe we then can have like a bit of a roadmap. And if, obviously, if any items need to be added or subtract, we can do it from that list.
Well, in that report, it didn't say how much sediment is in the bottom of that lake.
Yeah.
And what is in that lake,
Has it
or
been-
what's in all the lakes.
What's
And I
been
think that's a
measured?
very important thing we should look at. And we'd have to get permission from the town trustees and sample all the lakes in the village and find out how much sediment's in there and what is in that sediment.
Well, did they say it was high in phosphorus or something?
Yeah, high
I
phosphorus.
believe they did
It's got a
testing as
huge,
part of
it's got a
that
huge
report.
layer.
Yeah, and there was a follow-up by Chris Gobler in 2014, 2015, I think, where he did further sampling of the lake, just to
Yes,
see.
Did they sample all the lake, I mean, all the ponds, or just
No,
Lake
this was
Agawam?
just, Agawam's been
Just
sampled, and I know there's been some sampling in Old Town Pond.
Old Town.
Right.
But did anybody ever come up with how much sediment is in Lake Agawam?
I don't
A lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
It's a
it's
lot.
quite extensive, and they talked about dredging, and we've talked, we've thrown a lot of things around.
Dredging's, one thing I do know from the studies is dredging is astronomically expensive.
Yes, it is,
Not saying it shouldn't happen at some point, but
but
it is.
so effective.
Yeah, but you also got to keep in mind, you have all this chemicals that are in the water there.
Yeah,
Even
yeah.
if you correct everything on the outside, you're going to still have this
You
stuff
still
reaching out.
have the issue,
Right, right.
and you can't
But that's why I
mitigate
think
that.
The checklist is important because you have, it's multiple things. It's not, there's no one
It's just-
silver bullet.
You're right, there's many, many
Well-
things.
Well,
And
yeah.
one of the things I read about it, and I think I circulated the article, I don't know who wrote the editorial in the press about some ideas around environmental things you could do in terms of the fish life and the plants that help aerate the soil. Because yes, you have to remediate that sediment.
One of the gentlemen we had come before our board had mentioned about 4 things, and one of the main problems is what do you do when a couple hundred geese land in that pond?
Right, right. Geese are an issue, but I would say the studies have not shown that to be the most significant issue.
It
They
was,
are an issue, but they're not.
it was my takeaway from the,
Right.
it was my takeaway that it's the layer, the layer of phosphorus there that's major, and then the stormwater situation.
And stormwater and sewage.
Yes, stormwater and sewage.
They're both-
Those are the two.
And they're both from the houses around the lake, some of which have improved their circumstance, not all have, which is one of the things we need to think about, and I think probably in partnership with the Lake Agawam Conservation Association. And then secondly is from the village center, partially just because of the geography of the village center, which is very low, and immediately adjacent to the drainage into the lake.
Well, it seems to me that if we could do something that covered stormwater, sewer, and sediment layer, and maybe proposed a bond issue
Right.
to pay for it, and do it.
So I think it'd be great to have, if Assemblyman Teal came, that would be terrific. And I think maybe the other thing that would be helpful, and maybe something we can talk to Nick about with Chris Gobler, is sort of doing a debrief of everybody, of like the facts. People get very confused, I find, about all the facts having to do with the lake and what the cause. And it'd be very useful, I think, to bring everyone back to what the studies have shown. What I like about the two of them is neither of them have an economic stake in what happens. They're just scientists. So, one of the things I think when we did this a few years ago is we had people involved on many sides who had economic issues at stake, and I think it made it more complicated. But I'd like to maybe sort of bring, because I think we do, as Jesse pointed out to me a while ago, we do know so much at this point. And I don't think people in the village understand, they really are quite aware of the extent to which we actually know what's happening in the lake. That's not the issue. It's that the addressing all those issues is difficult. And I think it is also, just picking up on what you said before, there's stuff we can do immediately or short term, and we should be doing those and competing for funds and all that. And then there are the more fundamental things that will take several years to address, will happen over long periods of time. But I think you need to do both, because I think one of the things that's been very troubling is, people see a severe algae bloom at the end of the summer and they just despair that anything's happening, which is not necessarily the case.
You can't go in that water. Your pets can't go in that water. They will die.
Right.
It's just, that is it.
They will dissolve.
I mean, the good news is that the blueprint or the game plan is actually laid out for us here.
Right,
And so we just basically need to come up with
Right.
our plan
Yeah,
and start
yeah.
attacking everything one at a time.
Well, and we should prioritize and what we can do.
Dredging in there?
They do mention it.
Because I think I heard once that dredging would not really solve anything, it may make things worse apart being very expensive.
Make things worse?
Once it's settled, it doesn't really disperse, but if you start dredging, it's going to be all over the place.
In my opinion, though, the lake will continue to get polluted if we don't make the necessary changes now. So we maybe shouldn't even be talking about dredging until we solve all these problems.
I
And
was
then-
just wondering if dredging was a solution, because I had heard that it's probably really not necessary.
Yeah.
Is there anything in there? Does it say anything in there about that?
It does discuss, there's a section on of just what to do, lake management recommendations. So basically, I mean, it ranges from all sorts of things, ranging from that extreme to stocking bass, but it is here. But the beauty about lake and about our environment is that if we start to treat it correctly, it will start to improve itself.
Correct, correct.
So
Without having to dredge or anything, I don't think.
it might take longer, but once we start making these changes,
Yeah.
you'll notice over a long period of, slow to long period of time that they'll start adapting.
They've got basically seven items listed here. Starts out with stormwater discharge, groundwater flow, pet waste, waterfowl, fertilizer, shore and buffer management, and sediment accumulation.
And that was the last one, the sediment.
Right.
So,
Yeah, of course,
Jesse, do you know how much effort's been made in all of the other towns and villages, at least within the immediate area, in terms of work? Because obviously it's pretty much identical issues in a lot of these water bodies. And
Right.
should we be kind of coordinating or finding out what's been best practices?
It's an interesting point, but I was at, I attended the Suffolk County Village Official Association, and I talked to a few other officials of other villages who had to deal with similar issues. So I think it would behoove to try to reach out to other villages and see how they dealt with it. I think it's a very good idea.
What's the
if at
very,
all, they may not have dealt at
No,
all.
they have major issues.
Oh, that's
18,
interesting.
24 months ago at Georgia, and I know all the officials came out for that. So I don't know where they ended up with their plan.
yeah, they had a plan for Georgica.
Yeah.
And I think that's been a heavily privately backed effort, actually.
I think that makes a lot of
Kimberly,
sense.
you want to?
I should really
Yes,
come
yeah.
to the front.
Yeah.
First of all, so, Kimberly Allen, good evening. So I'm here as a capacity as a trustee as well as a resident, and what Jesse laid out was very well said. We do have a framework, and the village has done a lot over the last 10 or 12 years, and that has not been really understood, so I think your debriefing is very valuable. And to Laura's point, I think you hit upon the main elements that we need to address. Something else that I have a question for the other trustee, for the water trustees, I renamed you Ann, as well as the other towns, is compounding the issue now are the warmer temperatures, making this a much more serious problem.
Right.
But the village has undertaken a number of things in the last few years. Obviously, our new septic tank legislation, we may have to revisit, expanding that to a broader group. Our first legislation pivoted around the science that we had that said, these are the areas closest to the water bodies, and those are the areas that should really be prioritized with respect to upgrading the septic systems. The other part is the Lake Agawam is surrounded by some open space. We are working closely with CPF to try and obtain any last open space that we have. I know it's not listed in there, but that's something that we're actively pursuing. And in addition to that, Gary Gillespie has said that obviously we want to intercept every single bit of water that comes down from that 1,100-acre watershed that just throws contaminants in our bodies of water, but there's only so much filtering we can do. And according to Gary, we've already hit that. I don't know if that's what he told you, Jesse, but when we spoke to him earlier, he said, we've received every single grant down Meeting House, down North Sea Road, Main Street to do that. But I think that another part is to really work more closely with the town on these funding elements, town, county, state, federal. And to Jesse's point, which I actually received as an idea today, many residents have come up to me and said, I'd really like to take advantage of this septic tank grant, but I don't know how to do it. So on my way over here, I thought maybe we'll think about, could we get a consultant in the building department that actually holds the hands of people in the village who are interested in this and helps them work through all that red tape, including funding the septic tank in advance. And then if you could work your magic and meet up with all the private sectors and perhaps get a gun, I don't want to use that word, get an impetus to have people voluntarily trade up their septic systems who are very close to Lake Agawam. Now's the time to do it. But the village has really undertaken a lot in the last 10 years.
I think we are at the point of hopefully, I think people on this issue started in part because people who live on the lake came to us and said, can we get this effort started again? And I think one of the things we talked about was if the village is really going to take this as a major initiative and the town, we also need the property owners on the lake to take the initiative. Some of them have, but many of them haven't at this point. So, whether it's how they treat their lawns, or what they do with their Phragmites, or
how their septic systems
or how the
are.
condition of their septic system. Some of those houses have very antiquated septic systems at this point. That's sort of almost first line of defense.
I will end with this.
And just I'm just sorry, but the one thing Jesse said, which I want to sort of emphasize is, what happened in the Hudson River over many, many years is the river, they started to limit the amount of material that went into the river, and the river started to clean itself. And I think that built public support for doing the more serious work and the more expensive work. I think it's very hard to start with the most expensive work. So I think doing things that begin to bring the lake back to some health is something I think we really need to emphasize. Because again, one of the things I'm concerned about is how we maintain public support over an extended period of time to invest the money that's going to be required to bring, particularly Lake Agawam, but all of those freshwater resources up to where they need to get to.
But in terms of stakeholders, direct stakeholders, I think the residents around Lake Agawam, I think will be very glad to participate in this,
In a meaningful way.
in a meaningful way.
Interestingly, a 95-year-old resident of the village approached me this past weekend and explained to me that in 1930, he knew not to swim in Lake Agawam, and there were fish kills. There's been scores of them since then. But he also said during the Great Depression, apparently a number of the large houses were blighted. There weren't any owners, and those houses were taken down in the dark of night, and guess where those houses were dumped into? So you know this, Bob, right?
Well, more sediment.
And great work, thank you.
Comments from the audience?
I did reach out to the Lake Agawam Conservation Association,
You
and I
should
said,
talk a little bit about
can we get an administrator to maybe help with that? So it would be great if we could get that from the village. But it'd be just as good to have someone also in the private sector helping liaise with anybody, whether they're on the lake or not, for these septic systems, because it must be, it can't be an easy application process. So to have somebody that is an expert or can just help us. So I think they may consider that. It's just the first phase, but I did ask. I thought that'd be a good position to create for somebody.
Just before you change topics.
No, we're not going to change topics.
Ann Welker. I didn't come prepared to speak, so kind of. But what I will tell you is that a couple weeks ago, I attended the Concerned Citizens of Montauk and East Hampton Town Natural Resources program that was geared towards educating people about converting their septic systems to the new improved nitrogen application ones. They had an open house. They had a couple people from the Natural Resources Department. It was very informal, but it was very helpful. It was held for a couple hours, so I'm not sure who would act in that capacity here.
Right.
Perhaps Peconic Baykeeper, maybe, only because they're working now with North Sea Beach Colony on improving septics there. So, and that I know that they know a fair amount, so that might be somebody to liaison with, Sean O'Neill. You know, I don't know, I'm speaking out of turn, but just that popped into my head as somebody that could be a point person to sort of help sort of pull all this together and get to, because as Jesse said, I think the numbers that I attended Long Island Clean Water Task Force a couple weeks ago, and I think there are, within the town of Southampton, 165 septic systems that have been improved, that have been updated at this point. And give me a little slack on my numbers, but Brookhaven Town, that has approximately, I believe, 500,000 people to Southampton Town's 50,000, has 166 septic systems. So in comparison, we're doing pretty well.
Right.
All said. But it is a fairly laborious system. But the funds do now exist at the town and the county and at the state level to make sure that for those who are qualified, it can be a no cost, perhaps some cost outlay up front, but it's covered over the Now, the one thing, though, that I do want to, as you made such a good point, sort of starting with the low-hanging fruit, the homeowners themselves on the lake, to address the pesticides, the fertilizers, and even just whether or not they have a buffer.
Yeah.
Because buffers make a difference. And there's so many people that have their beautiful lawns, their carpets that go right down to the bulkhead, or not even bulkhead, just the waterfront. So everything that's on their lawn gets washed every time it rains, every time their sprinkler goes on. It gets washed right into the lake and compounds the problems that are already existing. So that would be my, trying to go after that. Since that Lake Agawam Commission does exist, I mean, just to target those homeowners, and it's not just the homeowners, it is the landscapers as well.
Right. And that's, I think, one of the things we've found is you can talk to the homeowners, but thank you very much. The landscapers involved in this, so they're aware, is one of the most difficult things, because the homeowner may think he's doing the right, or she is doing the right thing, but if the landscaper just comes and does what's easy, it could be very different. I will say, several years ago, some of the members of the Lake Agawam Association did in fact create the buffers, which are good models, but many on the lake did not. And I think we're at a point where there's also more awareness, honestly, than there was then. That something really needs to be done, and that the homeowners need to be more participatory than they've been in the past. They can't just go to a cocktail party once a year. They need to actually do something.
Paul, I think they're starting to realize the smell coming from the lake is definitely going to affect if they try to sell the house.
Right. And the look of the lake, and when the algae bloom happened this year, I think a lot of people thought, oh my God, this is really going to impact the attractiveness of this property.
Not to even get near the water.
Right.
No.
Could the village, let's say, propose to cover the cost of creating these buffers prior to going to the extreme of legislating?
Possibly.
Mandated.
Yeah. I think there's a bunch of options. I don't think we need to, I think we could. I don't think we need to tonight decide which option, but I think it is helpful to lay out, as Jesse said, the sort of checklist, what's been done to date. Because, for example, the village has has tried to aerate the lake. There's a number of places.
Oh, yeah.
You know, again, this gets very complicated. Everyone wants the lake to be aerated, and they want to make sure it's not aerated in front of their house. So they want it to be aerated in front of their neighbor's house, basically.
I'm curious.
So, you know, there's all these issues of how difficult it is, and, you know, people want the drainage to be, they really want the drainage, and they want it to be not on their street. So, you know, some of the issues here with the lake is they really, I think as a group, need to get together now. And I think part of the problem is, not the problem, but part of the thing we need to do is give everyone a feeling that this is a community-wide effort. And I think for people in the lake to get involved, and I think they obviously have great resources, is to make them feel like everyone's participating in it. And I think one of the annoyance they have, maybe annoyance is not the right word, but one of the things that I think they've been somewhat frustrated about is just, what was the year of that study?
2009. It actually started even before that.
Yeah, so, you know, if you live on the lake and you were involved in 2009, the checklist, it's 2018, we're still having the same conversation. So, you know, I think one of the things that when we talk about low-hanging fruit, I think really important at this point for people to begin to feel things are happening,
How I got it.
so that you begin to create a constituency for the hard work ahead. Yeah.
My son's office.
Aren't you lucky?
I would like to add that the village is looking into licensing of the landscaper organization, to Ann's very good point, so that the knowledge around the application of pesticides and other contaminants is better controlled. So
They did put in a new bathroom. What did they use for septic?
I don't know, actually.
we're the first commercial IA system.
Right.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
Because I remember when somebody studied in the existing bathroom, they went down to the edge of the lake and they said, oh, look at there.
Right. Yeah. I think there's a lot more awareness about this issue than there was. I mean, sometimes these issues just need time to think about.
Well, they need time to
You know, and I
implement,
think
too.
also, as we heard at some of our meetings, there's a lot of like, okay, the answer is you just make a cut into the ocean and it'll all drain out. You know, people have these ideas. There was an article in the Southampton Press with another
I saw
magical
that.
idea that would
Yeah, I saw
solve the problems of the lake overnight.
saw that.
I think we have to sort of get people disabused of these ideas that there's just a simple fix.
Look at the one.
The buffer zone around the lake.
Right. The original buffer zone,
Yes.
right? Before people got fancier. Right.
Fancy.
Other comments? I want to thank Jesse for the hours he's put into it, Nick, who's not here, who's put enormous hours to it. The trustees have really, I think, taken up the effort in the last few months to get more involved in the town. I think everyone's now talking as a group, which is, I think, very different than it had been in the past. So I think, hang on. Any other comments, questions, thoughts? Plans for Thanksgiving? Yeah.
DEC high on your list.
DEC.
DEC is probably
State DEC, I presume.
state DEC, in my experience for 30 years of dealing with ag law,
Right,
is
right.
public enemy number one. Political enemy number one, and regulatory.
Just a-
Get the DEC to look at the laws of Michigan and Maryland, for instance. They're the best.
Just a note about affordable housing.
Yeah.
I was just talking to Kimberly briefly.
Right.
And we're going to meet with Diana Weir. Apparently, the town is getting ready to get serious about accessory structures.
Right.
So we will
Right.
Accessory apartments.
we'll find out what's on board with them
Right.
and what they're proposing.
Great.
And so we'll bring it, and share it.
Yeah, one thing I will say, it was very interesting. And Eduardo has a very good point. I mean, there's a lot of concern that we not do anything that takes away, what is people's major assets in life. But there was a lot of talk I found at the Hillcrest meeting about
Yeah, there was.
people really feeling that this resource of affordable, I was surprised actually, that this resource of affordable housing really is important, and that as it goes away, it really changes life in the village.
It is.
I mean, I expected more pushback on that than actually. It was an interesting sort of feeling of, we just see how that begins to change the feeling. And that neighborhood, I got to say, has this amazing feeling of fairly close-knit community.
Oh, it really is. Everybody knows everybody?
Yeah, it was
They
really
say
like,
hello?
yeah,
Good.
very different than what my block has become. mean,
I
it's
saw a really
interesting.
cool thing, just
Yeah.
accessory structures. I saw a really cool thing where they had prefab one.
Yeah.
Did you
yeah.
see that?
Yes, I did see that.
They're great.
yeah.
I live in one of those.
They even have a scissor aerobic house there, so you go in on the right-hand
Oh,
side.
seriously, Roebuck, I think, built one of the houses I lived in. I think it was a kit.
Yeah, the big thing on the West Coast now is mini houses.
Mini house. Oh, they're going
I think
small.
they're building them. They're building them like mad.
And-
It's really interesting.
As accessory or?
No, so they'll take a lot, and the
more
town or the municipality will allow 8 or 9 mini houses to be built on that lot, and they create basically a homeowners association for that lot.
Community,
But
yeah.
they regulate the income levels that are permitted.
Cool.
It's been a real effort on the West Coast to try to create, in-town affordable units.
That's
It's
wonderful.
very interesting.
Sure,
Yeah.
the price has gone over there.
Yeah, the prices there are even worse. It's unbelievable.
That's great.
Okay, anything else? So that's the end of our November meeting. I think our next meeting is December 5th, that Thursday.
Okay, thank you.